Thank you so much for having me here tonight. And I think it's such an important time to be talking about the role of government and the role of the grassroots, and looking at how we can change politics as individuals, as political parties, as organisations, because, gosh, there's a lot of politics to change, isn't there? I always talk about how change happens, because I think that it's very easy to look back in history and see what the defining moments were. When we look back and we think of Rosa Parks sitting down on the wrong seat in a bus, we sometimes forget that that was an organised campaign, that she was an activist, and that was part of how they were making change happen. Looking back, you can see that that was a flashpoint in political change, that as she sat there, not knowing what her future held, it just shows how our small actions as activists can change an entire movement, change an entire country, and actually how we go on to win. Because I see political change like one of those slot machines at fairgrounds or by the coastline usually. I'm sure that there are plenty in Bournemouth. Yeah. So we've been there, right? I used to go to Weston-super-Mare as a child, and you put your 2p into the machine and you watch it tumble down, and you see it maybe move a couple of coins, and you're like, maybe this is it, maybe that's the big win, and then you can put loads of coins in and you're like, maybe I'm not going to win it this time, but the next person maybe will. But in the meantime, you've nudged it, you've moved it, you've built something, and eventually all of those coins will come tumbling down. And that's what we are, those little coins, putting that little bit of change in, making those nudges. And maybe it's not us as individuals that will win these campaigns, but the campaign will win. We will have those big wins as a result of those small actions that make a big difference. Because I think it's hard when you look at the failure of government. It's hard when you see a government that is committed to fracking across the UK just against the wishes of the local community in places like Preston New Road, and think, how can we change politics when people are imposing policies on communities? But if you've ever been to Preston New Road or been part of an anti-fracking campaign, you will see all those people doing their part. Maybe they can't be there every day, but they're there challenging the fact that fracking is in Preston New Road, is up near Blackpool, and trying to stop it every single day. So they've been there for 2 years, creating a roadside campaign, basically slow walking in vehicles, making sure that they're disrupting, making fracking as unprofitable as possible. And it's funny to watch it, to watch everyone's parts in the community. There's one of our Green Party members, actually, Anne Power. She was made famous actually when she was dragged across road by police at the age of 85. But she'd been, at that time she was there slow walking in traffic, in vehicles, but was there with she's got her stick, being like, I can't walk any faster, as the police are trying to make her walk faster. I can't walk any faster. If you've ever walked with Anne, I think she walks faster than I do usually. But really kind of challenging the fact that they didn't want fracking here, and using non-violent direct actions, things that are completely legal to do when we're challenging what's happening in our communities, to make sure that fracking didn't start up in Lancashire, and building different campaigns and movements around it. And as you'll know, I feel like I went up so often, I was like, we do these things, we make a difference, and we will win. And now, as a result of earth tremors, as a result of a rising understanding of what fracking does, public opinion is completely shifted as a result of their campaign and the fact that they have refused to remain silent. And as a result, drilling has, I believe it's still currently stopped, in Preston New Road. And the concept of fracking in the UK has been challenged not just for a couple of days, not just for a couple of weeks, but we have challenged what fracking means and the very future of fracking in our countryside and in this country. As a result of people that refuse to be silent, as a result of people that said, this is wrong and I will tell you why it's wrong, and I will make sure that I am there doing something about it. Because when we want change, we're not all going to be the Ann Powers of this world, slow walking in cement trucks, so that usually the cement dries back and we have to turn around and go back. But we can do other things. I think sometimes when people think about politics, they think that politics only happens in Westminster, or just by putting a cross on a ballot paper, when actually there are so many different parts of politics that we need to embrace. I'm sure everyone in this room has signed a petition. Everyone in this room has probably written to their MP, gone to a protest and used these other forms of politics that means that we can create change and make change happen. I also think that some people think that working in politics means it's a bit like being a surgeon or something. You need to have a degree in surgery, and you need a medical degree to be able to do it. I sometimes think people go, oh, I don't know enough about politics because I haven't studied it, I haven't been around it, I don't have a degree in politics, therefore I don't have the authority to talk about it. But as we know, that authority comes because politics isn't something about people's intellect, it's about our communities, it's about our people, and it's about standing up for what's right and going out there and making that change happen. And each and every one of us have the authority to go out and do that. Because we've seen our communities being completely ignored by successive governments or local councils. I'm sure you've done an incredible job of holding your Tory council to account on many different issues, whether that's on a number of different bases, whether that's talking about environmental or social issues. And it's so important that we continue to do that, because my background's actually in the environment, and when you go out and you talk about environmental issues, people will say, what comes first? People changing, businesses changing, or the government changing? And it's all of those things. And when we're talking about oceans, and we can see it more than ever of how a one moment in time can change people's perceptions indefinitely. And the role that, obviously there have been a number of things that have created this tipping point in the UK, but with the understanding that people have about plastics as a result of David Attenborough and Blue Planet has completely changed perception in terms of individual action, the role of businesses, and Michael Gove is currently lagging so far behind what people want and can see as possible as a result of a change of government policy. A government policy that will create a level playing field for business, meaning that people who are doing worse things for the environment won't be able to undercut those people who are doing the best things for the environment. Policy that would mean that the environmental option could be the easiest, cheapest and most accessible option for people in their everyday lives. Because government can be quite slow and clunky. But one of the things that frustrates me most about government is sometimes the fact that there's a lack of understanding about what happens in it, and how our grassroots campaigns and people working in organisations like Global Justice Now are those who are highlighting, educating and supporting information getting out there. And it gives us so many tools to be able to challenge what happens in our governments and for us all to change the politics of our time. It's 2019, we're about to end a decade, and what will our decade be remembered for? Dickensian levels of inequality, people ignoring the fact, our politicians ignoring the fact that the UN has given it a clear message that we have 12 years to take steps to stop the worst effects of climate change. But maybe we'll be remembered for Brexit, I'm certain of that. Well, for the EU referendum, hopefully. We'll see what happens next. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the news, but as everyone was arriving, the WTO option has been voted against in Parliament, which is a setback for the government, but obviously a win for everyone in this room and all of those people who have been campaigning against the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. So it's so important that we're using our tools available to us through different campaigning organisations to lobby governments and prove that there is actually that thirst in communities to be able to change things. The strongest steps that we can see are those that capture people's hearts and minds. And I think certainly when you're looking in Bournemouth in the oil rig campaign, that this is something that really is looking at an issue of the past that they're trying to use to address problems in the present that is going to harm future generations. And I think it's so important that whatever the next steps are, remembering that those communities up in Lancashire, when they had fracking, the drills were built, the explorations happened, that they would never give them an inch far enough that they could take a mile and start fracking properly in their countryside, and making sure that they were out there every day, raising their voices, raising their concerns. And had it not been for them, then I don't know if the word fracking or Preston New Road even would have been on the tip of so many people's tongues when we saw people who were on the coalface, ironically, of environmental activism and creating environmental change. And I think there's so many issues that can get tied up in one point that as environmentalists, and people who want to work towards social justice, that we can be talking about, whether that's talking about the impact on biodiversity or the impact of the risks. I think it's interesting because I used to work in environmental issues, and when you work with businesses, they all want to manage their risk, and then you go in and you're like, the biggest risk is climate change, and they're like, except for that. I did work on some risk management for people, but it's quite interesting what they'll say. So one of them was the risk for a fast food chain they had lettuce growing in Spain, and they wanted to have a solution to make sure that as there's an increasing flood risk in the area that they're growing their lettuce, that they're not going to lose it from their product because they actually can't sell their burger without a piece of lettuce in it. And so I gave them this big program of things that they can do to mitigate against the worst parts of climate change, make sure they understood their supply chains, and ensure that they're using best farming practices. I gave this grand presentation, and they said, oh no, we wanted to know if we were meant to move our farms to Scotland or Norway. And if that's the environmental education of people in business, then I feel like we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that people are truly understanding the effects of this. Because when we think global and think local and act global, then we can build a movement at its best. And I think climate change is such an important aspect of that, because we know it creates growing social injustice. We know it will create the fact that it will be women who are hit most. People, I heard a report, which actually I haven't, I saw it in a newspaper article and I haven't seen the source for the report. So I'm just going to put that out there. In a world of fake news, I don't want to be contributing to it. But someone had said that in the Marshall Islands, people went to bed at night with their life jackets on in fear that their islands could get washed away. Again, I haven't got a source for that, so I don't want to like state it as fact. But by engaging in communities, we can be challenging what happens, because it's much easier to be able to say to people, this is what we can, the change that we can make here, whether it's investment in renewables, whether it's making sure that we're talking about safer walking and cycling routes, a public transport public transport system that works for people, ensuring that these options are the cheapest and safest and easiest option for everyone. And by challenging these things on a local basis, we can be thinking about the global impacts that those may have. Because grassroots campaigning can be from everything from environmental issues or social issues that does create that tipping point for change. And I think that every time we put a tweet out, or every time we put a Facebook status up, or every time we tell our friends down the pub about trade agreements that are potentially going to destroy our NHS, we might feel like we're just shouting into the wind. But this captures people's imaginations, and captures people's imaginations about what is possible. Because there's a vision that we must be building, a vision of fairness, a vision that means that society works for everyone, a vision that ensures that we're protecting this world for future generations. And all those parts of how we build that vision is how you win people's hearts and minds at every moment. And people know what these issues, people will be living the everyday effects of these issues. I think that when across the country working with green groups, it's been incredible to see the role of air pollution campaigning in terms of how easy it is to be able to talk about this on a local issue. We've seen massive changes in our government quite quickly when we had the Great Smog back in the 50s, which meant that the government had to take action because there was so much public opposition to something that killed so many people, the numbers of which grow on a regular basis the more we understand the impacts of air pollution. And being able to go into communities and talk about what the role that air pollution has in terms of affecting some of the most vulnerable in society. Those people, I've met a few people who are unable to leave their house as a result of the toxicity of the air, meaning they can't breathe properly, meaning that they're bound to their homes as a result of the pollution in their streets. And these people understand when you talk about health impacts of air, when you talk about health impacts of so many different issues. Ironically, the health impacts of meat, which I don't know if anyone watches Good Morning Britain. No? So Piers Morgan just had a massive go at me on Good Morning Britain yesterday when I was going to talk about the health impacts of meat, and he basically just decided that he was going to talk about my diet for 5 minutes. I was a little bit smug, and I hope that everyone will understand my smugness, because it was Piers Morgan. But I said to him that he was getting his knickers in a twist over a small sausage. And,
that is sausage.
And, well, you know about the Greggs sausage roll, and I was quite proud of myself, I'm not gonna lie. But how we actually talk about these things, health is a really massive aspect of it, and even when you see the health impacts of austerity, even people die as a result of government policy on a regular basis. The fact that we have homeless people dying on the steps of Parliament, the symbolism alone is tragic, but the fact that it's not just in London, it's not just in Parliament that this is happening. We have a role to be making sure that we are working to build towards those big visions that I'm sure all of us share in so many ways, of how we build a world, of ensuring that people have opportunity, that people aren't experiencing the worst of government policy, whether that's policies on austerity, not addressing social and environmental issues. So I was asked to frame the conversation on what can governments do and what can local action do. And I think that we really need to be making sure that our governments work for us, and making sure that we use every tool that we have to challenge what our governments do. But then remembering, when we take those positive actions in our communities, when we make that difference, when we build local campaigns, whether that's around an issue like fracking, or an issue like air pollution, or homelessness or austerity, that this makes a difference in people's lives. It inspires people, it builds a movement, and more numbers will come. And as a result of increasing the number of pennies put in that slot machine, then we will win. As a result, that those 2 pences will tumble, and we will win.
Thank you.
Time for questions. Maybe I didn't speak for quite long enough, but I feel like having plenty of time for questions might be a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I would say we've had a political class who for 20, 30 years have been disinterested. Oh, sorry. So I would say for the last 20, 30 years or so, we have had a political class who are best pay lip service to climate change, and at worst are totally disinterested. How do we get from a situation where, no matter how engaged we are as the public, we have a political class who take this seriously?
So there are so many different ways, and I said that voting is just one part of politics. Obviously it's quite a major part of politics. And how do we get people on our councils and in our parliament that represent us is really powerful. Working with Greens across the country, one of the things that I see strength in is diversity of voices as well, where Green Party councillors are able to challenge the government and the opposition, just as Caroline does in Parliament, to make sure that legislation has the scrutiny that is so desperately needed. And that does have an impact. What happens on councils has an impact on what happens on a wider scale as well. But making sure that we are... So there are those tools. I mean, the silver bullet to this is proportional representation, but the role that has in ensuring that every single person's voice is heard. One of my favourite statistics is in the 2015 general election, the Green Party got 1.1 million votes and 1 MP, and the SNP got 1.6 million votes and 56 MPs. So our electoral system isn't one person, one vote, because some people's votes are worth more than other people's votes. And how they're talking about grassroots campaigns, I think the campaigning group Make Votes Matter are doing
campaign
brilliant, because they're doing incredible things of actually really challenging how our system works and how people are left unrepresented as a result of a broken political system. A broken electoral system. So in Europe, every country except for us and the Vatican have a proportional system. So I mean, if you want to think of how our voting system could be more aggressive, then there's only one other option to look at in Europe of how you announce your results with smoke. So I think that would be an awakening for the political class, because at the moment people think there are safe seats, and one of the things I think is interesting is the way that people talk about, politicians, MPs, talk about seats as our seats, and it's like, they're not yours though, are they? People talk about safe seats, and I think we need to challenge the fact that people need to consider if they're still a safe voter, because all of these people that are just giving away their votes to parties that don't represent them is just reinforcing this idea of safety within the electorate. But then also how we do change things, it does take a role of using those political tools that I said about, but also ensuring that we are communicating the need for change, the issues for change. And I think that we've seen a number of kind of different shifts over the years. Part of the problem with Parliament on these issues as well is the lack of understanding of some of the complexities of things, nuances obviously, a lack of understanding of the complexities of some of these things. I think, especially around the environment and climate change, there hasn't really been a very clear. I was in a debate recently with a Conservative MP that said that what's more important is than talking about climate change is talking about the economy. But I mean, I'm not going to do anything that stops climate change if it hurts the economy. But completely ignoring the fact that there are no jobs on a dead planet. There is no economy on a dead planet. Some of the biggest issues on a local basis, for example, I've been to places that are flooded, which has destroyed some parts of their local economy as a result of the disruption of their local businesses that then have changed into high street chains and have completely destroyed some of their local features of their economy. But then, so challenging the political class, it's a tough one, because I think with a broken system then they are complacent, and using these tools that we have to hand of protest, of petitioning, is one part of that. But also I think what's important is to be, there's that kind of meme that's been going round that says something like, sorry, should I stand up for the questions? I feel like maybe I'm not projecting quite as well. There's a graphic that's been going round that said generations where we've said that it's impolite to talk about religion and politics has meant that we're really bad about talking about religion and politics in a progressive way. And I think that we all have a duty to be talking to our friends and to be putting information out there, whether that's on social media, about what we think, because there's a really interesting it's a psychological experiment, and someone goes into a room and there are 14 other people sat there in a semicircle, and they think they're all being experimented on, but actually they're the only person being experimented on. And they sit down and they're asked one question: which line is longest, line A or line B? And so the first person says that line B is longer than line A, and the person sat in seat 15 is like, what an idiot. I can't believe that they would think that line B is longer than line A. And then the second person says it, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth. And by the time that happens, they're like, maybe I didn't understand the question. They must know something that I don't know. I'm clearly the person that's wrong here. And the vast majority of people will say that they think that line B is longer than line A. And I sometimes think that politics can be like that. because people think that everyone thinks a certain way and will leave it unchallenged. But sometimes it only takes one person sat in seat number 7 usually to say that line A is longer than line B, to enable that person at the end to say what they really think. It's not even changing their opinion, it's enabling what they think anyway. And I think that as we're seeing this happening, but the other way, with the rise of the far right, where people suddenly feel enabled to say something that they've been thinking for a long time that they thought wasn't part of society. And we're enabling this has been enabled on one side. And I think we all have a duty to be making sure that we go out and we say, this is what we think, this is why, and trying to win hearts and minds. Because one of my favourite things to do is change a UKIP vote. My success rate is quite good, it was at 60%. And not to vote Green, but to vote for anyone other than UKIP. And that, just after Nigel Farage resigned, it went up to 80%, and I was just like, going to I feel like I just need to knock on every single door that there's a UKIP voter. But I think those one-on-one conversations and actually putting an alternative vision out there is powerful. And I know that that's not the easiest thing to be talking about, but I think it's those conversations that can make change. That was a long answer to a very complicated question. Any other questions?
I think what's quite interesting is you've got the local elections coming up, new unitary authority. We're told one day that we're going to get very, very close to another snap general election. So I think for me, in terms of the notion of the political classes, I think they're agitated because they've all got their snouts in the trough and they do want to maintain that snout in the trough. But the dynamic of it gives us a wonderful political opportunity. I've come from Paul, and a couple of days ago there were a number of us across here who were able to go along to the council meeting, and we thought the local Tory control council was rigid, immovable almost, in terms of its position over the A&E, but because they're against the ropes, and they're against the ropes because of people who participated in a very broad-based campaign that is not necessarily politically led by any of us. And that's a question I wanted to ask. I read Caroline's book, a group of us in a socialist radical readers group discussed it at length. She's got that lovely little passage where she goes into Parliament and told where she's to hang her sword. And she says, I'm going to try and bring about some difference. And you look at the end of the book and you think she's trying her best, but a single MP on her own. What one can't lose sight of is the political events that pushed Caroline there, the participatory movements, if you like, the greening debate. And I think the same for Corbyn as well. I think for me, the adventure around Corbyn, because I rejoined the Labour Party, green inside, red outside type position. I think for me, Corbyn represents and has that strength about the uncorrupted, the not corrupt. He's got an appeal, a very simple appeal to people, and he's been very principled over issues about racism and fascism. And I think it becomes tarnished when you begin to move into party political politics, doesn't it? And I think that's Caroline's assessment. I know your colleagues, comrades in Brighton, have struggled with unions over saying we're going to look at introducing a fairer wage, and that it was going to be some of the lower paid workers that were going to pay the price of it in the first place. So I think politics, when you start getting involved in organisations, is quite a dirty thing.
Yeah.
But you can't lose sight of what brought Caroline in and what brought Ben in, and that's the kind of stuff that you were talking about over the fracking. I think as soon as politicians take the kind of politicians that we're talking about, if they take their eye off those movements and they begin to focus on the machinations of Parliament where you hang the sword in the light, it's lost, isn't it? So for me, there's that issue about maintaining accountability, maintaining that participatory politics that all of us here want, and looking for a structure that does that. Does Green Party, Labour Party do it for me? Sort of. But I think democracy for me is about people's assembly and it's about people's participation first and foremost. And it's where political organisations branch out and meet those. That to me is the strength. It's about the unity in action of political parties. I would vote Tory tomorrow if they could save the NHS. But they're not, we know that. But I think you take my point. Is there a question in there? Yeah, there is.
Well, I also just want to, I think that there's a whole point in politics where for most people politics is something that happens to them, whereas for all of us in this room, politics is something that you do. And how we think about politics as something that you participate in, rather than something that these people in an old building in London do and then have an effect on our lives. And I think that that's really powerful, because I think that being out there, being on doorsteps, being involved in campaigns is a way of communicating how we can actually participate in a system that isn't really accessible to everyone. And so I think that, that how you talk about how you're part of the movement and growing movements is really powerful, but also just like our role in each of those, because I think that the online community has a really powerful point to play, but also I think that being physically out somewhere, physically doing something is also powerful too. And again, these are all things that unfortunately the far right are building on. And in terms of that unity, I think that right now, whatever party you're in, I'd even welcome the Tory party, even if they do destroy the NHS, to do something and say something against the rise of fascism. And we all must be united on this, and I don't care what people's party affiliations are, we need to be standing up, and we need to be making sure that we don't allow this toxic group of people to divide our communities and peddle hatred in them. I might be a little bit more determined on this today because we were just out in, we were just out leafleting, and ahead of us was someone leafleting for Britain First, which I found really surprising, as did my Green Party colleagues, and I think it just shows how things are changing, and if we keep our eye off the ball, then we don't know what can seep into our communities unchecked. And I think it's important that we build, whatever party you're in, of building unity against that rise of hatred.
That somebody thinks we got democracy at all. Christchurch Council had a vote as to whether they joined the local other councils. They had money in the bank, all from Paul up to the rising debt. 82% of them voted not to join. And the minister just overrode. Where's democracy? If he turns around and a member of parliament brings something up, that sounds good. So he's representing me, say, and your MP's representing you, and then the party whip says, oh no, you'll vote this way, so they will vote that way.
And
that's not democracy. We haven't got democracy.
I'd be the first to say that we live in a broken system for those reasons that you've outlined, for the fact that we don't have a proportional system and people's votes go uncounted. I often think that the power, one of our policies on being able to recall politicians, I think is quite powerful. So if you petitioned, and so more people petitioned against an MP than voted for them, then I think that's strength enough to say that there needs to be a question about their legitimacy to represent that community. Because if you bought a toaster and the toaster didn't do what it said on the packet, then you'd take it back and you'd be completely within your rights to return that. But if you elect a politician that says that it's able to do all of these incredible things, like a toaster that's actually able to make bread within it, or all of these kind of fantastical things, and then they go into Parliament and don't do it, then we have no rights to question that or to change that. And I think that there are so many aspects of this, of a political system that needs challenging at every step, because I actually think that some of the wider issues that you're kind of talking about as well can be changed. I mean, I personally believe in the power of the grassroots, and I think that we need to be making sure that we have power closest to the people it represents. So I do think that councils should have more power over their communities. I'm from Wales. The Welsh Assembly does incredible work in representing who we are in terms of Wales and our culture, and actually doing incredible things like having a policy called the Future Generations Act that means that no piece of policy can be passed unless not just the next generation is being considered, not the generation after, but numbers of generations' time. And you've got to think about this through the framework for policies. And I really feel that there's that power closest to the people it represents, not through councils in quite the same way. And I think that there are so many shifts that need to happen in politics that it's not just about how you have Parliament being sovereign on all of these points of how you kind of build, that was a bad word, but how you actually build and strengthen our local democracy as well. But all of those points, I do think in the UK, we do need to be challenging all kinds of aspects of how our system doesn't work for us. You've named a few points, but I do think proportional representation again will be an opportunity to make sure you've got more people there challenging the fact that if you've got a one-party state, you've got more chance of corruption, you've got more chance of these things being waved through, you've got more chance than the whip just taking through operations that means that councils aren't always working for the people they represent. Actually, in the Green Party, we don't believe in the whipping system, and when we are in opposition, we have to have a whip. And so that person is actually usually the person that does all of the research for people, and they'll say, so what happens if your local NHS is going to be privatised? What normally happens is Virgin Care have given you this amazing glossy kind of pack of information that you go through that's easy to read, and a local group will have a really important document, but maybe it's not presented in quite the same way as the professional ones, and so their job is actually to go through and go, these are what we've been given, but I've gone through the pros and cons of it all. Here's like an easy digestible one-pager, vote how you like, but actually kind of going through and creating the arguments rather than just being presented with the arguments from one side. So I think there are many ways that we can be saying how politics can be done differently, but it will take electing. We can make that change. We can make a shift change in society, but what will make real change is having people elected in Parliament that creates, or in councils, that creates that long-term institutionalised change that means that we don't have to keep fighting at every opportunity, that it just becomes, the way. Yeah.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to say about something that I'm part of, which is Flat Pat Democracy.
Oh yeah.
So I'm part of a group that's wanting to set it up locally. So for people that don't know about it, it's for Poole, Bournemouth and Christchurch. That means putting forward 76 people that haven't got a political background necessarily, but are community minded, and doing exactly what you're talking about, having facilitated meetings, making sure that both sides of the argument are debated fully so that you can make informed decisions, and so it just becomes sort of decisions are made that will benefit the whole community, because there isn't all of this sort of party political stuff going on and all the money sort of invested in whatever. Yes, and so I just wanted to let everybody know about that here, and also see what your thoughts are about. You seem to recognise the name Flat Pat Democracy.
Yeah, because I've gone to visit our local party on Frome, so
okay.
I've actually worked
There's one in Monmouth as well, isn't there?
I haven't met the ones from Monmouth, but I think it is important to be, because I mean one of the things that I do feel about it inevitably is, as Greens, we do a lot of this work of how we debate ideas and how we debate principles, and local parties actually have are able to do what they think is best in the local area. So it's not like there's a party machine that forces people to toe a party line. If you get involved, you probably have the same kind of aims and goals of what the future of this planet should look like, and how we make sure that we are tackling social and environmental issues. And so I think it is really powerful to have those debates, which we have at conference, and building our understanding in that way. And I think there are kind of many different ways that we can be building those in our communities. But I think what's really important actually is how we engage communities and how we build that up as well. Because I think in terms of kind of whatever party we're in, one of the things that I think people get frustrated at is they don't always know the difference between all of the parties and who is best to represent them, and how we actually differentiate ourselves. And I think there's a lot of things that we can be doing. I thought it was really interesting in the 2015 general election when we had the debate, the cross-party debate that the Greens eventually got invited to, where it felt like UKIP, Tory and Labour were all saying, this is what you've done wrong, this is what you've done wrong, whereas the SNP Plaid, and not specifically dividing it out by gender, but it is a gender divide, would be saying, yes, I agree on this point, and this is why we're different. And I think it's really important, whatever party you're in, of how we engage people in conversation and be clear of how we represent people in different ways, because otherwise I think people get frustrated by similarities sometimes, but then frustrates people about politics as well.
So let's say this time next year everything has changed, there's a general election and we return to Parliament, tons of environmentalist MPs who are all concerned about climate change, and they're all right on, lovely people. We've had the election here and we've got 100 more councillors like Simon who are engaged in their local communities, doing green projects and all of that. You said the time frame 12 years. What on earth are we meant to be doing in those 12 years? What are the things we should be saying? We've got those politicians who listen to us. What levers do we pull? What do we say? Right, next week you have got to make sure you bumpty bumpty bump. What are the policies that are going to sort this out that they can implement? Yeah, just an easy one. Just an easy one. Yeah, three policies that will save the world.
So, I do think that interestingly, and there are so many, I like the idea of having a weekly campaign and just getting everyone involved and being like, this week we're going to tackle austerity, and then on Friday just being like, check. But I mean, I think that at the moment it's interesting. I've been in politics for well over a decade, so I remember that when Labour were in power and it felt like we were fighting for something. So I'd go on NHS demonstrations and you're like, we want more money for the NHS, we want to be making sure, well, to protest against the PFI contracts and the kind of background of privatisation, but then what we have now, I feel like we're now just like, please just stop doing all the awful things you're doing. It's not how we build those positive campaigns to become a lot harder. Because I think that when you look, there are a number of different really high-level frameworks that everything is operating in at the moment, and that's the growing divide between rich and poor, and of kind of vast inequality across the whole country, an environment that is being ignored, and a democracy that needs to change. And I almost think that if I was going to have three overarching points, I think you could do that on a really broad basis. Below that, there are 100 campaigns, a housing first policy, for example, to make sure that homeless people have a roof over their heads to help build their lives, or ensuring that we've got investment in renewables that means that we don't need to have oil rig exploration on areas of beauty and with high biodiversity. Making sure that every single person's vote counts for the proportional system. So I think there are those kind of three overarching points, and the policies that hang below them could be 100-fold. So I feel like I've given you 365 policies as a result of those three things having 100 different issues below them. But I think what we have, what also needs to happen, which I've always been really proud of what we do as Greens, is I think most people don't realise that our policies are evidence-based policies that are discussed, debated and voted on in conference. And then those policies aren't about what we're going to do if we're in government. They're a vision for the future, or not even the next 10 years, 20, maybe even 100 years, of the kind of world we want to build. And then we write a manifesto that are the stepping stones to getting there. Because if you're not going to have if you're only going to think about politics within 5-year cycles, then you're only going to have policies that work on a short-term basis, meaning that they're not a long-term vision to long-term issues. And I think that there's far more that we can be doing of challenging whoever is in Parliament, even if you had that beautiful Parliament that you described. If we're not thinking about the kind of world that we're going to build, then that will be lacking in what it's trying to achieve.
Okay. Tap.
Anyone behind? So I realised that coming back to you.
I could give an advert for Make Votes Matter, which is the first Tuesday of the month.
Oh,
At
brilliant.
the Cricketers in Springbourne, if anyone's interested.
What was that, Sue?
Make Votes Matter, the group that meets every the first Tuesday in the month at the Cricketers in Springbourne. It's a small group, about 5.
So they challenge the fact that we don't have proportional representation, so the fact that people's votes go uncounted, and they've done a lot of
Street
incredible work.
campaigns, huge street campaigns this year, last year. So if anyone's interested.
We'll tell you a story that entertained me at least about Make Votes Matter. So they have, there's actually a group in the Conservative Party at the moment that is Tories for proportional representation, and when they elected their chair, they used first past the post.
Practice what you preach.